This is an ABC podcast.
Hello there, Edwina Farley with you for A Country Breakfast. What can your undies tell you about soil health?
Farmer might have buried a pear in a field and next door in the native vegetation, and the field pear breaks down and the native vegetation pear doesn't break down hardly at all, and they go, what's wrong with my native veg soil? Sure, that should be brilliant. You go, well, actually, it's probably really good soil, but we've been gripped in drought for the 2 of the 3 years we've been doing this. When there's a lack of water, the biology in the soil that's breaking down these underpants is just inactive.
It's a winning combination, apparently. Stay with us, won't you, to find out more. First, though, for a look at the rural news of the week. Good morning, Serena Locke.
Hello, Edwina.
Now, farmers on the New South Wales-Liverpool Plains were cheering this week. The New South Wales government will buy back the coal licence from Chinese giant Shenhua.
Yeah, so the New South Wales Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, has declared there will never be mining on the Liverpool Plains, and the government will pay the Chinese company Shenhua $100 million to relinquish the exploration licence on more than 6,000 hectares of prime agricultural land.
I almost can't remember when we haven't talked about this issue. It's been a really long back and forth.
It has, and Fiona Simpson has been there from the start because she's a farmer on the Liverpool Plains, and she really kick-started her political career. She's now president of the National Farmers Federation. She was there, 20 years ago. The campaign began against Shenhua's Watermark coal mine proposal. Really a long blockade by farmers, a march on Macquarie Street in Sydney. And, Fiona Simpson says the plan to mine coal there was always a bad idea.
It was one that didn't take into account the most amazing agricultural land that we have here in Australia and the biggest single underground water resource in the Murray-Darling Basin. And you hear the words, John Barilaro's words, where he really did put it on the line that there is to be no mining in the Liverpool Plains ever, not ever. It's exciting, but there's still a little bit of work to do when you think about cementing in the rights of the Gomeroi to access their very traditional lands and to make sure that they can continue to preserve those artefacts that they feel so strongly connected to.
Yeah, and it's not the end of coal mining in New South Wales, Ed. A tender process began this week, in fact, for an exploration licence for more mining near Wallar in the central west of New South Wales. American company Peabody has previously faced opposition for such an expansion. Of course, we've got the Hunter Valley, Upper Hunter Valley by-election going on at the moment for a New South Wales seat. Now, I think the New South Wales government is a bit caught between wanting to push ahead with renewables and transition away from coal. So, this is a active dialogue at the moment.
There is money available. Talk of the nation, isn't it? That transition.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, New South Wales government has made a $25 million pledge and to fund an investment into mining communities as they transition away.
Western Australian live cattle exporters are having their best season in years.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's now the start of the live export season because the good wet season has finished and pastoralists are getting even more than they were last year. Cattle are selling for just over $1,300 each, and 4,000 head have just been loaded at Broome for Indonesia, and stock agent in the Kimberley, Andrew Stewart, says it's the best season he's seen in 20 years.
I've never seen prices in excess of what's sort of currently getting paid, so it's on a par with the northern numbers. It's just been a fantastic season, such a good long wet, and a lot of these cattle have been on green feed since sort of late October, November, and it's quite a relief for everybody after 2 or 3 drier seasons.
After years of drought, a Queensland grazier has had to get thousands of little helpers to help break down the soil's hard crust.
Yeah, so the grazier between Charleville and Morven has introduced thousands of dung beetles to parts of her property. So good rains and busy beetles have seen the paddocks in the drought-affected southwest region start to thrive. And Adma Sargud says she's seen the soil change after introducing the beetles to Hulton Station about 6 months ago.
they just went crazy. Literally overnight, we could see them just burrowing through the dung. And then they take the dung down and they bury into the soil and actually aerate the soil and obviously then provide fertiliser into that soil. And we had little plots marked off and we watched them. We've been very lucky to get the rain as well. But the areas where we introduced the dung beetles, in a very short time, we have noticed that incredible improvement in the soil.
This year, the southwest Queensland community of Charleville is commemorating 31 years since those floods of 1990, and of course all the volunteers who came to help.
It's a time that those living along the Warrego River will never forget. The peak of the flood at a record 8.5 metres. It inundated more than 1,000 homes. In the old scale, 10 inches fell in one night. That's 250 millimetres. And in that area, it's so flat. It fell on the 20th of April in 1990. It killed thousands of livestock. It destroyed machinery. It made it difficult to clean up on isolated farms. But in Charleville itself, locals remember with gratitude the volunteers who came to town. And they came to be known as the Mud Army. And here's the Merway Shire Mayor, Sean Bradnich.
It was just unbelievable with the people that come to Charleville to help out, all the donations, the mattresses, the food. Like, it was just hard to believe. The town was actually just really buzzing with people pinging around town. I mean, there wasn't any businesses open because, like I said, majority of those businesses got flooded, inundated. So obviously the focus was getting in, cleaning up, and then was getting those businesses back on their feet.
Talking about flooding rain, the recent rainfall has delivered floods down to the Menindee Lakes, which is now full for the first time in years.
Yeah, so the Western New South Wales town of Menindee is celebrating. The lakes are filling up, and they're also aware that it could be released to supply irrigators and towns and Adelaide's needs, but also the environment further downstream. So mixed emotions, I'm sure. Some of that northern rain made its way through the Darling River and it's snaking its way to the Menindee Lakes. That's east of Broken Hill. Management of this water is very controversial, though. Under the current rules, once the volume in Menindee Lakes passes a certain amount, then the control of that water passes from the New South Wales Government to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, Commonwealth Authority. And Melinda Pavey, the New South Wales Water Minister, says this pulse of water is a huge benefit to Menindee, could be as much as 2 Sydney harbours. And she says New South Wales is working to better manage the water use in the floodplains as well.
We've all got our eyes very much too on the challenge with a lot of that water coming through and lack of oxygen in that water and the impact on fish. And I know I'm having conversations with the Environment Minister Matt Keane as well as our Fisheries and Primary Industries Minister Adam Marshall to ensure that is managed as safely as possible. You know, it's a problem when you do have a big event, lack of oxygen in that water and as it's coming over the floodplains and you know, in areas that we hadn't been cleaned out for a long time, it creates some challenges.
Now, this is a story for all the grey nomads who are keen to help farmers out but don't think they could cope with heavy work.
So Tasmanian apple growers have turned to mobile automated picking platforms, and it's about combating that picker shortage across the state, well, across the nation really. We've been hearing a lot about it. And about 14 machines are complementing the traditional picking to bring in the harvest. And the technology does away with that heavy bag and ladder use and instead replacing it with mobile conveyor belts and platforms to help the pickers, get the apples off the trees. It isn't cheap though. Each conveyor belt costs $150,000. And on this organic apple farm in the Huon Valley in Tasmania, there's 2 of them. And because of the lack of workers in the travel restrictions, he's ordered 4 more machines and they're on back order. And so part of the all-female crew that our reporter found was picker Rachel Walters.
Yes, I have picked apples with the bags before and I've found that to be quite painful for the body. So picking off the platform is definitely a lot better. You don't get nearly as tired and worn out. And having the platforms that can move up and down, that makes it a lot easier than lugging ladders around and having to climb those as well.
Thank you, Serena.
Thanks, Edwina.
Serena Locke there with this week's Rural News.
Open your ears to the world with the ABC Listen app. Amazing stories of ordinary people living through extraordinary experiences in days like these.
I pick up the phone and I hear, "Hi, it's Elton."
Tackle all the mayhem in the sporting world with Roy and HG in Bludging on the Blind Side. Or join Triple J's Hobber and Hing as they challenge Aussies to deliver their most elaborate yarn in Simply the Jest.
I looked in the rear vision mirror and my crocodile had gotten out of the box.
Download the ABC Listen app today.
This week we're discovering life below the Earth's surface. We'll chat with a cave diving enthusiast who's exploring underground cave networks in South Australia. It's proving to be good training as he prepares for a potential trip to Mars. We'll get tips on cooking with saffron from a former chef turned farmer who's growing flowers that produce the prized spice. And we'll meet the police officers who are swapping paperwork and patrol cars for footies. They're using the game to build positive relationships with young people in remote communities.
If anybody in the Northwest understands what the dry season's all about, there's two religions, it's basketball and football being the primary game that everybody lives for in the dry season up in the Kimberley and certainly in Pilbara as well. So that's a great avenue. I've found it a brilliant avenue to, like I say, build those relationships and break down those barriers and build that rapport.
How a shared love of the game is creating bonds between law enforcement officers and the communities they police. That story coming up. First today, dressing for success. Women in regional Western Australia are getting a helping hand to re-enter the workforce with a new outfit and a confidence boost.
How about we try those things on? Yep. And see how we go.
For some people, getting a new outfit might not mean much, but for Melissa O'Donnell, it's changing her outlook on life.
I got it. The top I'm wearing is brought more colour to me and I actually feel brighter than what I have been.
She's been styled by Dress for Success, a global charity dedicated to empowering women to achieve economic independence.
A much softer
yeah.
look automatically.
Actually, that
fits really well with your skin tone
and your eyes.
Hello, I'm Madison Snow. I'm here with Melissa in her hometown of Kalgoorlie in the Goldfields region of Western Australia, where she is getting a styling session to help her prepare for re-entering the workforce. Melissa has been looking for work for 2 years and has found it challenging as arthritis has stopped her from doing what she loves.
I was an aged care worker. After having kids, I couldn't bend, lift the elderly anymore or push things or help them into the things. So the Max Employment suggested office admin where you're in a chair and you sit there and type and it's not so hard on my back.
She's also struggled with her self-esteem.
I lack the confidence. I go to job interviews and I sit there and I'm nervous. I was negative myself. I thought people would judge me for my weight. I went to a job interview the other day and did a try on and got told I wasn't pretty enough. So that's where my lack of confidence, I judged myself a lot.
CEO of Goldfields Women's Healthcare Centre, Gloria Moyle, organised for Dress for Success Perth to come to Kalgoorlie-Boulder to run workshops. It's the first time the charity has visited regional Western Australia.
It's a wonderful little not-for-profit that has very similar values and mission statement to us, and that is to empower women, but particularly to get them confident and ready to get back into the workplace, but if they've been disadvantaged or vulnerable at any stage of life. Particularly here in the Goldfields, we're looking at a lot of family and domestic violence situations where people are starting off again. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic last year, a lot of people were out of work, particularly women. We also know there's a lot of homelessness happening here and WA-wide. We've also got a lot of carers here that are predominantly women who have either stopped looking after their loved ones or they've passed on, and it's actually time for them to regain meaningful employment and get back in the workforce. And sometimes you just don't have the finances or the support systems to do that.
Dress for Success gives women new clothes for job interviews and run free workshops teaching them how to do their makeup, manage their finances and improve interview skills.
Is to empower you with knowledge on makeup and self-care to just build your confidence with your look and who you are.
Dress for Success manager Karen Woodcock says confidence is key.
A lot of them have been through personal traumas where their confidence has been eroded. So we do a lot of work with women who've been in corrective services facilities. We do a lot of work with women who are long-time carers and women who are domestic violence survivors. And for various reasons, their confidence has been eroded and they don't recognise that they've actually got a lot of skills. We know they have the skills, they're just buried. So it's helping them unpack those skills and recognise that those skills are important in a workplace.
Throw your hat in. What have you got to lose? Throw your hat in.
Dress for Success volunteer Nadia Marzo runs workshops teaching women interview skills and how to make great first impressions.
They'll see a position advertised and they don't recognise the skills they have because it doesn't fit the little box of what's being advertised. There might be a position that talks about organisational skills. And I can remember one person we had who said, I don't have organisation skills. When you talk to her, she had a child with disability and she also looked after her ageing parents. Her organisational skills, she could have done the Olympics. And also, she didn't recognise the skills that she had for applying for funding. You know, they just don't recognise how transferable they are. So we try to help them realise that they've got so much to offer that they're just not aware of.
All the volunteers came to Kalgoorlie on their own time, but Miss Marzo says it's worth it.
Look, even today, a woman has gone off for an interview and hopefully it all goes well and she'll come back, that we met yesterday. A lady yesterday who came in with her partner and he was just also so supportive of her and just the appreciation, because they come in and they will say things like, I don't wear dresses. And we go, okay, because you've got to be comfortable. Amuse me, just put on a dress. They put on a dress and they just look fantastic. She showed her partner and he said, you look delicious.
The Goldfields is rich with employment opportunities, and Gloria Moyle questions why some women aren't able to access them.
I think it's something that we really need to focus on. I think that is definitely in the Goldfields a need. We know being women is a disadvantage, unfortunately, but also looking at our called women, our Aboriginal women. We've got our LGBTQI community. We need to be diverse and be inclusive. You know, there are so many different women particularly who have so much to offer, yet, you know, perhaps they've been out of the workforce, as I said, for caring, or they're looking after their children, or whatever their roles are. I think it's time that we really embrace that and looked at the synergy that, you know, a different point of view can bring to your workforce, whatever that is. And, you know, there are at times some barriers to that. And I think really all our local employers need to really be open to the diversity and inclusiveness that we're really supporting here.
Melissa might not have a job just yet, but she says the Dress for Success volunteers changed her perspective.
Today has been an eye-opener and I've actually stopped judging myself and I'm going to come out on the better side of it.
That was meant to be.
Yo, 11 on that side and how many on that side? 0. Okay, so okay, hey, stay in your circle. Stay in your circle. Stay in your circle. All right, this time.
At this sports ground in Broome in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, police officers are trying out a different role to their normal day of policing work. Stepping away from patrol cars and paperwork, they're picking up Australian rules footballs and joining in a footy clinic with local youth.
Good work! Oh, close winners. There you go.
Hello, I'm Matt Bamford. I'm here watching on as junior players take part in a goal-kicking drill. This clinic is one of a series being held across the region as part of a push for more police officers to learn football coaching skills. WA Police has teamed up with the Fremantle Dockers Club to help local officers gain their coaching accreditation and build better community relationships in this football-loving region. Sergeant Shane Scott is Broome District's Youth Policing Coordinator.
A big part of what we do is engaging with young people and building relationships. So sport, particularly in towns like Broome, is massive. So a way for my guys to sort of break down and build those relationships is to get out on the ground and be involved at the grassroots level.
And what about actually taking that step to get the coaching accreditation?
Yeah, it's building those relationships not only with the kids but also with people like the Fremantle Dockers. I've been up in Broome since November, but I've got 3 boys who have all played through junior football. They're adults now, and their friends and my close group of friends have all come from the football community. So not only is it building relationships with the kids, but it's their parents and the broader community. So really looking forward to it.
And what's the feedback like from the officers? Is this something that they're interested in doing, they want to do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, who wouldn't want to, be able to come down to the ground and have a kick of the footy with a few of the kids. And as I said, just get to talk to them, find out what's going on in their day, what challenges they're facing, and as a stripper right back and have a kick of the footy. Look, we'll make sure that we've got footballs in our cars as we're driving around. I'm more than happy to stop up on the side of the road and, have a handball or a kick to kick and, just talk to the kids and find out what's going on.
What's your plan for where this could go?
Yeah, look, for me, it's just about providing some stability and engagement, to the kids of Broome. And then out of that, finding out, look, we may come across the next Roger Hayden, from the streets of Broome. So giving them the opportunity to have a crack at it, with the guidance from us, quite often they see, the guys driving around in the police cars and, they're going from job to job and don't have the opportunity to engage, or, there's some negative, feedback or comments around police. So this is just an ideal way for us to break those barriers and, identify those kids that potentially, could go on to be either, really good footballers or just, break them out of some sort of cycle that they're in.
Yeah, and it's proactive policing, right?
Yeah, look, we find the best relationships we build, with some of the young people in town, not just for their perspective, but also that whole sort of family group perspective, and it's giving them the confidence to be able to tell us when things aren't sort of going quite so well for them, and reaching out and asking for some support. And, football, sport in general just breaks that down, and you get that opportunity to talk to the kids and their families. They know who you are at a personal level, and, I'm starting to get, families and parents contacting me at all times of the day, asking questions. So although it's, it's quite full on, but, you love it. It's just what you're here for.
Daddy, he got one. I wanted to do a banana. Go. What is this?
Football has been an essential part of Senior Sergeant Andy Henshaw's work. He was a long-serving officer in WA's largest Aboriginal community, Bidjadanga, south of Broome, and an assistant coach for the footy team. He says the game is a great way to build relationships and open up communication with local communities.
Look, I found benefits when I was in Bidjadanga, just the relationships you're able to build with the community and certainly with the players, and that's long-lasting, and that's what I'm endeavouring to do up the peninsula, build the relationships with community members, and that just breaks down those barriers and builds that trust with community members, and that dispels that distrust of the police.
And why footy? Why do you think footy is the thing that cuts through?
I think that if anybody in the northwest understands what the dry season's all about, there's two religions: it's basketball and football being the primary game that everybody lives for in the dry season up in the Kimberley, and certainly in Pilbara as well. So that's a great avenue. I've found it a brilliant avenue to, like I say, build those relationships and break down those barriers and build that rapport.
And what's it like there's a pretty good turnout here from lots of different officers, potentially looking at getting their coaching accreditation. What's it like to see that kind of participation?
It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and I've reaped the benefits of doing such course. I'm fortunate to be a coach, and stuff like this reaffirms why we're out here doing what we're doing.
20 hand passes, ready to go. And you got to count out loud. Set.
Senior Sergeant Andy Henshaw of WA Police. He was speaking with reporter Matt Bamford in Broome. You're listening to A Country Breakfast on RN. Edwina Farley with you. Still to come, the delicate and labour-intensive job of harvesting saffron. And we'll meet an explorer with a spirit of adventure. For now, he's heading underground, but if things go to plan, he could be venturing into space.
So this is Pines Cave. It's probably one of the most well-known around. The water level used to be much higher, so about sort of where we are here, the bottom of the walkway. But yeah, people have been diving this since the 70s, to the best of my knowledge. It's a gorgeous cave and it's quite extensive.
This part of southeast South Australia is a mecca for cave divers and a special spot for Josh Richards.
And off to the right-hand side here, there's actually a set of chimneys that drop down. They zigzag back on themselves, a bit of a spider web, but they actually wind up. There's a huge room on the other side of the road over there called the Crazy Czech Room that was found in the early 90s, I think, by a couple of Czech doctors who'd actually come over and done their training here. And during their sort of dives of pines, they discovered a tunnel that no one had kind of seen before and squeezed down through it. And the tunnel's gotten a bit bigger now, but yeah, there's a whole other room that's huge. And a little bit further, about 50, 60 metres further on, is another cave. And there have been a lot of questions for the last 20 years about whether or not there's a connection between the two. And this whole area is riddled with caves, but this is the one that people come to quite regularly, and people wanting to dive, wanting to explore. It's not what everyone does, but there are still things being discovered, which is pretty cool.
Hello, I'm Beck Wetham. I'm here with Josh near the entrance to Pines Caves in a forest not far from Mount Gambier. At the start of this year, 35-year-old Josh took on a nearby accommodation business that caters to visiting cave divers. In between running tours, he can be found metres underground, exploring this region's mammoth cave networks.
The water down here is ridiculous. It's almost like being in a shopping centre or somewhere like that, filled with water, and you've got the opportunity to drift up to groceries on 3rd floor or something like that. You get to go and explore all these different places, but instead of floating through a shopping centre, you're floating through this ridiculously amazing, huge chamber with all these tunnels and all these different areas off it to go and explore.
And what's the feeling like when you come out at the end? It must open up. You've got all this light flooding in, is it?
You forget. You actually forget about the world. I've gone diving here and it been scorching hot, and it's a relief to get into the water, and then you focus on the dive and go and do the dive and you come back up and you're like, oh wow, no, it's still scorching hot, or it's raining or whatever. You forget about the weather, you forget about the world, you forget about everything except what you're doing. I don't know about relief. It's more oh wow, hang on, no, there's the rest of the universe still going on out here, but my universe has shrunk down to whatever I'm doing there and then. So it's very zen. It's very like in the moment. Yeah, I come up at the end of a dive and I suddenly remember that life has kept going for the 2 hours I've been underwater.
Josh's journey to cave diving has been a roundabout one. His father worked as a diver in the military, and he always expected to follow in his footsteps. He studied physics at university, joined the army as a combat engineer, relocated to the United Kingdom, tried his hand at stand-up comedy, wrote a couple of books before putting down roots in this cave diving community. Now he's found his home on Earth, but he'd be prepared to give it all up if an opportunity arose to venture into space. 5 years ago, Josh Richards made the shortlist of 100 candidates with Mars One, a private consortium aiming to establish a permanent settlement on the Red Planet. If selected, he'd undertake a one-way trip, leaving Earth forever.
So there's part of me that sort of goes, preparing for leaving it all behind, blah, blah. And even as I suppose, inverted commas, put down roots here and buy a house and invest in the cave diving community here and invest in friendships and all that sort of stuff, there's still a part in the back of my head that goes, if you had the opportunity to go to Mars, you'd sell all of this, you'd get rid of this stuff in a heartbeat. It's just about being aware of potentials, but also living here and now. I still find a huge amount of purpose by being involved with Mars One. It may not ever go anywhere. The signs aren't great, but I draw a huge amount of purpose from the idea that we should be going and exploring space, that we should, as a species, should be out there and discovering new things and exploring.
It seems like, all the careers that you have had, whilst they do take a serious level of commitment, you've been able to back away when you realise it doesn't align with your morals or, what you originally envisioned. With space, I feel like you're really committing for the long haul. Is there any part of you that goes, maybe I'll get there and realise?
Yeah. I think the big one with, especially with Mars and the idea of going one way, that purpose that I'm talking about becomes much, much bigger than me. It's not just about fulfillment of personal goals or personal interests or anything like that. I don't care if I don't go, but I care about someone going. And so if I can put my hand up and say, this is a thing that I'll support by being involved with, then I have to do that.
and Josh has found some similarities between his passions of cave diving and space exploration.
People who come here have different motivations for why they cave dive, but there are people who are genuine explorers. They really want to go out and find new caves, connect caves that are close to each other, do all these weird, wonderful things that you can't just do with a robot. You actually have to send people in to do this sort of stuff. There's an active opportunity to do that. So in some ways, it's fulfilling that explorer element that wants to go out and go to Mars, but I actually have the opportunity to explore here, to go and dive these caves, to learn more about the geology, how they connect to each other, why they form, all those sort of things.
We're just picking a few flowers at the minute. We're kind of waiting for the cold weather at the end of this week. We'll expect more.
As the warmer summer days give way to cooler autumn temperatures in this part of central Victoria, Rosemary Pamick's saffron plants start to bloom with brilliant purple flowers.
It is a bit of a bell curve, so it'll start off quite slowly, and then you'll find you'll have, 1,000, 2,000 flowers in the middle of the season, and then the season will slowly die off again until around middle of May, definitely, the season will be over and the corms will start going slowly into their dormant period over summer.
Hello, I'm Eden Hennanen. I'm here with Rosemary on her property in the central Victorian town of Denali, where she grows saffron crocus. She then carefully picks and dries the flowers to collect their crimson stigma that's highly prized as a cooking ingredient. Saffron is not only one of the world's most expensive crops, it's also very delicate and labour-intensive to harvest.
During harvest, I'll come out to the paddock around 7:30 in the morning and hand-pick each flower. There is a reason why it does need to be done by hand rather than by machine. You want to keep as much of the thread intact as you can. So I don't want broken threads. The flower is picked quite delicately from the plant. You actually want to pick them when the petals are still quite closed. Again, you want to protect the threads from being exposed to too much sunlight because that can degrade their quality as well. So that's why we go out first thing in the morning and pick them all before the flowers open, and then I'll take them into our drying shed. I actually pick and dry on the same day. Once it is dried, I will package it up into our different sizes. So some may be catering size for cafes and restaurants, or our little 100 milligrams, which I sell with recipe cards, which the home cook can go and have a little play with and experiment with in the kitchen.
100 milligrams, it sounds quite a bizarre amount to be sending out.
It does, and part of my job is to teach people how to get the most out of their saffron. So for those who maybe haven't used it often, there's two ways of using saffron. You can toast the threads, and a lot of Indian dishes will call for your spices to be toasted together, and that's one way. Or the other way is to infuse it like a tea, so warm up the liquid that you're cooking with. So it might be a chicken stock or a veg stock, or if you're making a dairy-based ice cream, you might warm up your milk and leave the saffron in the warm liquid for at least an hour to infuse, and that'll bring out all the colours and the flavours, and then you can go on and make your dish. And saffron is not one of those flavours that will punch you in the face like chili. It does need that little bit of time to develop. So you'll often find with even paellas and curries that you'll use it in, the flavour will be even stronger the day after. So
We're looking at some raised beds here. You're growing them a little differently to the way most growers would grow saffron. Tell me about this.
Yeah, well, we've chosen to do that for a couple of reasons. We are quite conscious of what water we use on the farm, being off-grid. And I'm also quite conscious of what chemicals are used to turn our natural clay into the kind of friable soil that saffron needs. So I didn't want to rip up the whole front paddock and add a whole lot of fertilisers and whatever else we needed to do to turn that into saffron-friendly soil. So instead, what we've done is use the garden beds, and that way I really only need to micromanage our garden beds. Saffron is actually quite sensitive to waterlogged soil. By having them up off the ground, I can really guarantee good drainage.
Why did you decide to grow this particular spice?
So when we first came out to the farm, because my background is in the food industry, I worked as a chef in kitchens in Melbourne for many years. So I knew I wanted to do something with food. And because we're off-grid, I'm not sure if people are aware, but anything with a refrigeration unit or a heating element can drain your battery bank. So I knew I wanted something that didn't need to be refrigerated. It has low energy requirements and also the low water requirements. So yeah, and it was also something that was a little bit different, and I could see huge possibilities in all the recipes that I could come up with. In history, it's also been used as a fabric dye, so I kind of was quite inspired to go down that track as well.
And how much are you hoping to harvest this season?
Good question, and I could give you a number, but nature will make a liar out of me, so I shouldn't really count my chickens before they hatch.
Rosemary Pamick is growing saffron in central Victoria, where she spoke with Eden Hennanen, and before that, Beck Wetham introduced us to Josh Richards, who's been shortlisted for a one-way trip to Mars as part of the Mars One program. But for now, he's exploring underground caves in southeast South Australia. You might have caught the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy. It's a fairly explosive telling of the difficulties oceans are facing with illegal fishing and environmental degradation. But some Australian fisheries researchers contend it's a bit overblown and that there are simple things consumers can do.
I always tell people, you need to know three things. You need to know what the species is. Everyone says sea bass. Well, what is that? You need to know what the scientific name for that is. You need to know where it came from, how it was produced, right? Was it wild caught, was it aquaculture, and from where? And then need to know how it was caught. And with those bits of information, you can make your own choice about whether to eat something or not.
We'll find out more about what we can do in a moment.
From the story of the only rock humans eat,
salt is a chemical,
to the intriguing tales behind tea.
Bushels totally misread the Australian tea market.
Spice.
Without spice, we are not Indonesian.
And wine.
It has this combination of drinking the god, plus, my God, it tastes magnificent.
Come to the kitchen table in The History Lesson, and I guarantee you won't leave hungry. The History Lesson. Anytime you're peckish, hit the ABC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Australian fisheries researchers are questioning claims made in an anti-seafood documentary airing on one of the world's largest streaming services. Seaspiracy is a film on Netflix directed by British filmmaker Ali Tabrizi. It takes aim at the environmental impact of fishing and tells people around the world to stop eating seafood, whether it's farmed or wild caught. Andrew Chin has been working in marine research and management since the late 1990s and studied fisheries in the Pacific as well as state-of-the-art environment reporting. He's telling Tom Major here that there's some misleading or sensationalised content that does need further examination.
One of the good things this film does is it's raising the conversation. We're talking about it. People are talking about it. I guess my concern is a lot of things that are stated as fact aren't actually based on the science. So, for example, that fact about the fisheries being depleted by 2048, the original author of that paper has since revised his estimates, and we've got good data showing that many fisheries around the world are actually rebuilding. One of the troubling things, I guess, about the film is there's this narrative of there is no such thing as a sustainable fishery, and that is clearly incorrect.
What about the Australian context here? I mean, we often pride ourselves in Australia at being on the cutting edge when it comes to the environment and in particular, I guess, food production. Does Australia stack up, or are there unsustainable fisheries here too?
Overall, we are recognised around the world as one of the best leaders in sustainable fisheries and fisheries management. We've got some things going for us. We've got a very large ocean area. We don't have anywhere near the population density or population pressure that you see in places like Africa and, even Europe, the Mediterranean. Those places have really been hit by fishing pressure. We've also got the ability to manage our fisheries. One of the most informative things, I think, in this debate is something called the Status of Australian Fish Stocks Report, which is produced by the Fisheries Research Development Corporation. And that is essentially a scientific stock assessment for all the different commercial stocks of fish around Australia. And overwhelmingly, most of them are sustainable.
How do you respond to some of the claims in the film that certification practices that are meant to give the consumer some feeling of confidence that the fish is sustainably produced have got, I guess, some issues around their rigour and ability to be influenced by these major seafood corporations?
Nothing's perfect, but, I am fairly confident that people are trying to do the right thing with these certification schemes. And I will say one of the certifiers has responded, actually, and their rationale for saying that, they certify most people is because a lot of people in the pre-certification screening stage realize how much goes into it, and then they just don't continue. If there's criticism that everyone that applies gets certified, part of that perception might be because of the pre-screening that they go through.
There's been quite a lot of controversy, Dr. Chin, about the trawling industry, particularly when it comes to some of those newer, extra large-sized vessels. Is it true that 1.6 billion hectares of the world's ocean floor is being effectively clear-felled by trawling each year, as was portrayed in the film?
So, there are some studies showing some quite staggering figures about how much of the area of the seabed is actually trawled every year. And, let's be honest, it is a lot. That said, it's not the same everywhere. So in Australia, for example, less than 10% of our waters are open to trawling. And the other thing that we need to bear in mind is in many cases, these places have been trawled for decades. So in the film, they make this comparison between, the area of new rainforest cleared every year versus the area of trawling. And that's actually an unfair comparison because in many places, these trawl grounds, like I said, have been cleared for years. Now, if there was this massive push to open up massive new areas of seabed to trawling, that comparison would be valid, and personally I'd be concerned about that.
Fish farming, which has been also criticised in the film, is it true that aquaculture does cause extensive habitat loss and degradation? And is this being, I guess, taken into account when the idea of sustainable seafood consumption is being bandied around?
I guess, again, this is where the devil is in the detail, right? A lot of aquaculture in places like Southeast Asia and India has got very, very bad reputation because they've basically clear-felled mangroves, filled in coastal wetlands and destroyed habitat to create prawn farms. And, there's been quite a few films and exposés about how that industry in Southeast Asia operates. Aquaculture in Australia is not the same. It's much more tightly regulated. And I'm a fisheries expert, not an aquaculture expert, so, I can't go into too much detail there. But, just from the stuff I've read and the way I know our environmental legislation works, there's a lot more oversight with the aquaculture we have here than, say, in Vietnam.
With about 2/3 of Australia's seafood being imported, though, is that a major concern? Is that something that I guess people should realise has an influence on the sustainability of the food they're eating?
Yes. Short answer is yes. I mean, I always tell people, you need to know three things. You need to know what the species is. Everyone says sea bass. Well, what is that? You need to know what the scientific name for that is. You need to know where it came from, how it was produced, right? Was it wild caught, was it aquaculture, and from where? And then need to know how it was caught. And with those bits of information, you can make your own choice about whether to eat something or not.
Dr. Andrew Chin is a fisheries researcher with James Cook University's Centre for Sustainable Tropical Fisheries and Aquaculture, based in Townsville. Well, many farmers are having a go at regenerative and ethical farming, and on the mid-north coast of New South Wales in particular, it's become very popular, with a number of meat producers dedicating their practice to giving their animals the best quality of life, trying to create high-quality meat for the community. But when the region's local abattoir closed down early last year, processing the animals became more complicated. Keely Johnson spoke with Andrew Hunt, who works at Longtable Farm in Coombe, just south of Forster, about the impact this has had on their business.
So pork would probably be our primary product that we sell at the moment. But as you mentioned, we do have a lot of animals and other enterprises on the farm, including lamb, beef, organic vegetables and honey. Obviously, being regenerative farmers, we care about improving our land and our land management practices that hopefully benefit the soil and the whole planet rather than degrade it.
The pigs and animals at Longtable Farm are able to wander around the property and get amongst the natural elements. It's something we may not see on large-scale factory farms, and Andrew Hunt believes it's important to give the animals this freedom.
If we can shift the way that food is produced at the moment with these big factory farms, they're obviously great at putting food on our table, but I guess the question is how long can we keep that up for? There are a lot of detrimental environmental effects from that kind of farming. And I think we're in a time now where the consumers are a bit more aware of how their food is produced and are starting to demand better practices for animal welfare and also for nutritional value. So I think that kind of consumer-led demand is really great for small people like us.
When the local abattoir at Fredericton closed down in 2019, many small-scale meat producers on the mid-north coast were impacted. Now, Beck, Brent and Andrew have to send their animals 6 hours north to the nearest processing plant.
So for our pork, we have two options. We have the option of sending them to an abattoir near Casino, which is a 6-hour drive north, or there's about a 6-hour drive south to the Southern Highlands near Sydney.
And this has complications, not only maybe a lot more costly and a lot more of a hassle than the local Fredericton abattoir that recently closed, but that's a very long way for animals to travel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we spend, as ethical farmers, we try to give our animals and our pigs in this case the best life that we can. That day of taking them to the abattoir is incredibly stressful for the animal. I mean, they have to go onto a truck for 6 hours. They get pushed onto a truck full of other pigs that they don't know, foreign smells, foreign people, incredibly unfamiliar territory, and anyone that spent any time with a pig will know that they are sentient beings and they're quite aware and they do stress. So while people say this is just one bad day, ideally we want our pigs not to have a bad day at all. Yeah. And so if we could ideally slaughter them on farm in their home where they are at peace, then they won't even have a bad day. Yeah. And so I guess that, apart from animal welfare and the well-being of the animal, it's probably better for the meat that it's not stressed and it's not damaged, and we can take the care that we have been giving it its whole life. We can also take that care in the processing of the animal, which is incredibly important and often overlooked.
Andrew Yeo moved to Bulahdelah from central New South Wales 3 years ago to start a small boutique sheep farm.
I suppose the big difference with Bulahdelah has been the high rainfall's taken some adjustment, and just the rapid fluctuation of climatic conditions you have in the coast. We're much more traditionally used to a sort of a slower process to droughts and floods, so to speak, but you flip a lot more quickly here on the coast, and it's been a bit of a process managing that within the pasture systems and the sheep that we're trialling here and seeing how that works.
Andrew and his wife Emma occasionally produce seasonal lamb for local cafes and residents. But since the Fredericton abattoir closed, he has found it more ethical and economical to breed his sheep for sturdy coastal genetics to sell rather than produce meat.
Yeah, we've currently got 50 ewes, and they've sort of the nucleus flock that we've got left from the original 160 we brought over. And what that's enabled to is to, as I say, have that as the 50 nucleus remaining ones that they work best for the genetic pool that we're going to try and develop moving forward for these sort of coastal condition requirements.
And what are those genetics that you're after for these coastal conditions? What's really important that you would like to see here that, would be completely different to a sheep you'd find in a different area?
Well, I think a natural worm resilience and resistance is really very high on the agenda for here. It's one of the key problems that producers are going to face with the smaller ruminants, especially on the coastal conditions, and the capacity to have the genetics represent their potential on very low value coastal grasses. So that's going to be a very specific element of the breed here that's going to be different. On these trying coastal conditions from those point of views, it's going to take some time to very carefully select the genetics from that pool that are going to do the best that they can under these conditions.
Andrew Yeo there, a sheep farmer based at Bulahdelah. Well, what do you do with your old cotton undies? It's a personal question, I know. Sorry about that. Well, actually, they're being buried in backyards and farms right around the nation, and all in the name of soil health. Megan Hughes has the story.
If you're anything like me, your mum probably told you to wear your best undies in case anything happened. But this test aims to see just how daggy your tighty-whities can get. And it's not a brief experiment, taking course over 2 months.
So what we do, we put berry undies, cotton undies in the soil, and they stay there for 2 months. This is basically looking at soil health, soil biology, the microbial activity and bacteria in the soil. So the theory is that the microbes work on the cotton, which is a natural fibre, and it breaks it down over a period of the 2 months.
Wayne Seiler is an agronomist working with cotton growers in Maryborough, Queensland. Soil Your Undies is a joint campaign by the University of New England and Cotton Info. Facilitator Dr. Oliver Knox says they started it at a cotton industry conference after hearing a similar program in the US and Canada.
We suddenly had 50 pairs of pants rocked up to the conference in plastic bags, and the farmers were over the moon, I guess, about this competition that they now had that looked at their soil biology and their soil health based on the degradation of pairs of pants.
So I imagine it's come a long way since 2018, and now there's a national map of where people have buried their underwear. So
yeah, it was a dream when we started. I said it would be lovely to map this, and it's taken a few years to get there, but we've done it now. So Cotton Info is hosting a map. So we went from sort of 50 growers to maybe another 50 growers the following year, and probably the same again.
Back in Maryborough, several farmers got their hands dirty with mixed results. Cotton grower Scott Maxwell was one of them.
It was a good result for here. There was really only the elastic band left. So, yeah, I was pretty happy with the result of that.
For you, looking at that, what does that tell you?
More or less, it tells us that our soil's healthy. We don't really need to do too much to it. It's a pretty good indication of soil health, really.
As I understand, your kids were involved with burying them and digging them up?
Yeah, as you can imagine, they're pretty young, so burying a pair of undies and digging them up 8 weeks later had a certain attraction to it. But yeah, look, it was educational for them. They understand a lot more about things now, so it's well worth the exercise.
And are they pretty interested what Dad does on farm?
Yep, reasonably interested, yeah.
For those farmers with poorer results, Mr. Seiler says there are steps they can take.
Yeah, we'll look at what crops we grow there. We might put legume crops in, or maybe green manure, cereal crops with a fibrous root system, and just try and structurally get the soil better.
Were there any surprises in this trial?
Yeah, no real great surprises. Yeah, there was one block that had very little breakdown, and that block had biosolids put on it, so that was a bit of a surprise, yeah. That particular area seems to be a very hard setting soil, so it's wet today, and 10 days time it goes like cement, so we've probably got to look at putting gypsum and some other material on there to make it better, improve it.
And the big takeaway is soil has a Goldilocks quality. It can't be too wet or too dry, as Dr. Knox explains.
In some areas, particularly we've had, like, say, a farmer might have buried a pear in a field and next door in the native vegetation, and the field pear breaks down and the native vegetation pear doesn't break down hardly at all, and they go, what's wrong with my native veg soil? Sure, that should be brilliant. You go, well, actually, it's probably really good soil, but we've been gripped in drought for the 2 of the 3 years we've been doing this, and I know a lot of places still are in drought, but when there's a lack of water, the biology in the soil that's breaking down these underpants is just inactive. Its enzymes can't get to the cotton, and when you break down cotton, you make glucose, a lovely sugar, and they can't take that sugar back up. So we've seen the importance of water in our systems, and in some cases too much water. We have had some pairs of pants where they were buried and the areas became flooded, and the soil becomes anaerobic, and the bugs that are doing a lot of this degradation process aren't entirely aerobic, so they don't all require oxygen, but most do. So a flooded soil tends to break them down less as well.
Dr. Oliver Knox ending that report from Megan Hughes. And that's the program for this week. We hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Edwina Farley. Thanks for listening, and stay with us, won't you, on RN.
listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.